Hello, I'm Doug Musio. This is City Talk. He is one of the most highly respected constitutional law professors in America and one of our most prominent civil rights activists. He was the first African American to be tenured at Harvard Law School, where he resigned to protest the school's failure to appoint women of color. He served as dean of the University of Oregon Law School, where again he resigned when the faculty refused to hire a qualified Asian American woman. I first met him with his wife Janet when we picked him up after him being arrested protesting the Amadou Diallo shooting. He's Derrick Bell, currently professor of law at New York University. He's the author of 9 books, most recently Silent Covenants and Ethical Ambition, as well as the now standard law school text, Race, Racism, and American Law. His legal articles have appeared in the most prestigious law journals, and he has been published or featured in all the major American news media. Welcome, Professor Bell. It's an honor.
Thank you very much, Doug. And Derrick is fine.
Oh, thank you. As I noted in my intro, we first met with your wife, Janet, who was a student of mine at Baruch, when we picked you up at the first precinct after being arrested and protesting the Amadou Diallo shooting.
Right.
We've got the headlines. Cops face justice, facing 25 years. Here we're in a new millennium. Is the story the same, and what is the story?
I think the story is that America views blacks, other than the ones that they deem to have made it, and even they, as threatening. I think threatening is the way. And if you're in a poor neighborhood where the crime rate is high because the unemployment rate is high, that's even more threatening. And even when, if Tiger Woods puts on a hooded sweatshirt and tries to jog around the wrong block, he's going to be in trouble. Although Tiger Woods is saying, if Oprah, greatly beloved. So what we have here is this sense that these guys are threatening. I can't say, because there have been some incidents in New York, the one with the Jewish guy who was kind of deranged, got killed, probably they didn't have to do that. But mainly it's in black neighborhoods or black folk who are deemed not in control. And I think that there's a tendency to overreact. I mean, if you look, it's easy to tell somebody's going to get 25 years, and that's certainly not going to happen. But if we were police and sensing what the society feels and reflecting that, and we're the first line of defense. Then when something like this horrible incident happens, you start shooting.
Even a black cop starts shooting.
That's right.
It's irrespective of race at that point.
That's right.
Okay. Having read some of your most recent stuff as well as earlier stuff, as I noted to you earlier, I was both chagrined and uplifted by it. And I guess my chagrin began when I read the opening to Silent Covenants, where you argue that racism is an integral, permanent, and indestructible component of this society. Yeah. It's irremediable?
Probably. See, we live in this capitalist society, and let's call it what it is, that by definition means that some people are going to make a whole lot of money, gain a whole lot of power by the exploitation, if we want to use that word, of a whole lot of other people. Now, in that kind of society, how do you keep the people down below from rising up? In fact, back when capitalism was getting really started, some of the great thinkers of the time felt it couldn't work. It couldn't work because the people down below would rise up, particularly if it was in a democratic situation where they could vote. Well, it has worked. And it's worked for a lot of reasons. There is just a sense that if you work hard, you can, the Alger, what is it?
Horatio
Alger stories are certainly there. And so there are many components, but one of them is to have a group identifiable who are deemed on the bottom. Even when they rise up, they're still on the bottom. Oh, there's exceptions. And so with that system, which we've been practicing for 300 years or more, even the lowliest, no account, unimpressive white man or woman can feel that somehow I'm superior. There was this film of a Ku Klux Klan, I can't think of it, in which this old white guy, clearly poor, what have you, rises up to testify and said, every morning when I wake up, I thank God I'm white. He has nothing, you see. Let's take today's situation with affirmative action. It's just an amazing thing that I think, and maybe I'm wrong, that if we had a national survey of whether the greater danger to this country was affirmative action or the growing disparity in income and wealth. Maybe I'm paranoid, but I think affirmative action would be deemed the greater danger. And we have the law in a situation now in which there's this careful scrutiny of any kind of policy. I don't care how remunerative it is, how much it's deemed benign, how much it's trying to help people who've been downtrodden. It's examined under the closest judicial scrutiny about going to colleges, going to graduate schools. At the same time, Doug, we have a system in which major colleges, God knows what the lesser colleges do, have all kinds of special admits. The legacy admits. The money admits. Doesn't make any difference. If so-and-so is on a list who have given $1 million or so, then that child, that nephew, unless they're totally out of it, they're in. And there is, I mean, I think I'm shocked, and yet there's no complaint.
And this is endemic.
That's right.
And,
that's right.
And is progress an illusion that we see? I mean, even in my lifetime, I could argue that I've seen progress. I was in Richmond, Virginia with my mother when she took us to Washington, D.C. in 1953. And it was colored water fountains, and I had the mistaken, going over to drink water. Things have changed, but you're saying at its root it hasn't,
that's
and
right.
It can't?
And no, but the changes have.
No, right.
But the things have taken different forms. The subordination takes different forms than it did.
Okay, less overt.
But this is it's not because all white people are evil or bad. It's because the system requires that there be this out group. And in America, that's black folk. Now, there's some stories that, now the people from the Middle East are facing that. And to some extent, that's true. But we have all these hundreds of years of tradition. So that even at the highest levels, you said, I'm a visiting faculty member. This is my 16th year at NYU. And John Sexton, my former student, your longtime friend, who's now president and when he was dean, said after I left Harvard, we'll put you up for tenure. I said, John, thank you very much. Been there, done that.
Right, because you would have had to resign for something over there.
Well, that's because
right.
As a visitor, I don't have to deal with the faculty. Because the faculty
this is
there,
a plus for you.
That's right. The faculty there is as determined to hire people like themselves as they were at Harvard. Now, are the people like themselves dumb? Hell no. They're very smart. But it's a very narrow thing, and it includes people of color only incidentally, only every little once in a while. And this is not, and as I go around speaking at other schools, it's the same thing. Now, these are the highest educated people, more knowledgeable. They're not racist in any, but when there's only 2 positions open, we should do a little bit about minority hiring, but it doesn't happen for the most part, unless there's a lot of pressure. And as you get further down the line, it doesn't get better.
Okay. But at the same time, you have this belief. You read your work, whether it's Silent Covenants or certainly Ethical Ambition, and it's almost as if Derrick Bell's saying, this is what I believe, but I'm going to work my damnedest to make my prophecy self-defeating. What is it that keeps you going, given this rather pessimistic view of both the present and the future?
I think that life is a miracle and an opportunity. And that while our society focuses on power, particularly as represented by money, by celebrity, and what have you, I'm not sure, as I look at folk who have gained those, that there's a hell of a lot of happiness. There's a lot of unhappiness. I think I see a great deal of satisfaction and some degree of happiness in people who have determined to spend as much as they can on recognizing bad stuff and making it better.
Okay.
You know, you don't have to. I think Christianity has gotten so off the rep. But Jesus' basic message was that your life, you get closer to God or what have you, by reaching out to others, by bringing people together. I mean, you know, the Jews were unhappy because he didn't come with a sword and what have you, but he was a greater revolutionary than those who came with a sword, because they weren't going to do very well with the Romans. But his idea was to break down the purity system that was so endemic, to have an outreach, to talk that God loves those who love him, and you love him by doing for others. That was revolutionary, you see. And we've gotten so far from that, it isn't even funny.
So part of what goes, the background to Ethical Ambition, which is really a non-religious book about the values of good living. What are the roots of your hope in this commitment? I mean, is it organized religion? Is it belief in something above and beyond this that gives you and others this commitment?
I think it's a lot of things. One of the things, it does bring the satisfaction, even when you lose.
Okay.
Even when you lose. Sometimes you win. But even when you lose, you don't feel bad that you have not just rolled over and taken it.
Okay.
You see. Now, you can't do that for everything. Some things you just kind of have to let go. But you build up points, I don't know about in heaven, but you build up points in your own self that kind of carries you over the bad times.
Okay.
You see. If you can say, dag, I fought that battle, I lost, but I'm glad I fought it. You see.
You have a quote from Mrs. McDonald in Faces at the Bottom of the Well, where she says, I can't speak for everyone, but as for me, I'm an old woman. I lives to harass white folks.
And this is a little lady way down in Leake County, Mississippi, a rural area. And in my non-wisdom, I had convinced those folks that they should desegregate their schools. And it ended up being the first school desegregation to take place in fall of 1964. And those people caught hell.
Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you call the mistake, if you will, of Brown, and look at the mythology of Brown. You call, and in the opening of Silent Covenants, you call Brown a magnificent mirage. How is it a mirage? Why is it magnificent? And make your argument that you make in the book.
It seems to me that for many years, we policymakers, lawyers, people with some pull, and maybe politicians to a certain extent, believe that segregation was the evil. And if you somehow got rid of the legal support for segregation, things would get better. Now, why we thought that, I'm not sure. But segregation was so endemic. You said yourself, when you went to the South, you were put in, white.
It was really shocking, right?
And so it was so much in your face that you thought, gee, if we could only get rid of that. And the schools were sort of the weak link of segregation. So you could desegregate this public facility or that, but you really couldn't because, you know, they were there. But the weak link they felt was education, and that's what they started with, trying to equalize salaries. That didn't work very well. Equalize facilities. Finally decided desegregation. And they achieved desegregation in some of the colleges where blacks had to leave the state in order to get particularly graduate education. And it worked out. And you finally got to Brown. And we thought that the court had recognized, and to some extent they had recognized, that separate but equal in the area of education just wasn't working.
And almost an inherent that separate was unequal.
What we didn't recognize is that Brown came about in 1954 rather than years, because school desegregation suits had been filed since 1850. And what we didn't realize is that in 1954, we had what I call, in some other word, the interest convergence.
Yes.
That is, blacks only, and I think other groups too, but blacks dramatically only make progress not when they are suffering serious injustices, including slavery or segregation, not when they are able to make great proof of this suffering available in courts or what have you, but when the policymakers recognize that what the blacks are seeking will serve their interests, will further their interests. And in the 1950s, remember, that was the McCarthy era.
Right.
2 years before was Dennis versus United States, where they sent these 4 scholars to prison for a long time under a conspiracy statute, the Smith Act, for teaching Marx and Trotsky and what have you. Teaching, that's all the proof they had. And yet there was such fear that about the communist countries making a big deal with regard to the segregation here and what have you. There was a fear here that blacks coming back from the war were not going to take this stuff anymore. So that this decision served to improve our foreign relations and could kind of make serve as a proof that, well, this country wasn't so bad after all. And so everybody applauded.
So this is sort of the latent underlying reasons that
I think.
Okay,
it's not any opinion.
Go ahead.
But what the proof of it is that the very next year, when white folk, which this court was fearing, rose up and they were going to succeed and everything else, the court backed away. They didn't honor the NAACP lawyers who wanted immediate desegregation, which might have worked better than what they sent it back with this all deliberate speed, which the South interpreted as never.
Right.
And so it was many, many years before there was any desegregation at all. Finally, the court started giving us really effective orders. I mean, they were really hard hitting. But you couldn't keep white folk from moving. So this school that had been desegregated suddenly
was depopulated.
The first desegregation, they would close the black schools, fire the black teachers, you know, and send the black kids to not the best white schools, but to the worst, where the problems would be most serious and where the whites weren't getting a very good education. So that and then over the years, the resistance remained, whites kept leaving, and so that you ended up with that decision being honored, but in terms of enforceability, either in education or in any place else, worthless, because it relied on intentional, provable segregation, discrimination, and that doesn't happen.
And in fact, it seems to have worked best, if you will, because of the reaction to it, the violation of it, the white reaction to it, which horrified everyone else and led to substantial changes in the 60s.
But mainly in other areas than education.
Right.
You know, because
facilities, voting rights.
And those came about because of the marches. And again, that interest convergence worked again, didn't it? You know?
Go ahead. Right.
So that there was recognition that, boy, we thought we'd make more money with segregation. It turns out that we black folk down filling up the streets, everybody's staying home. So we need to desegregate. And they found, we'll make even more money with black people because they spend a lot of money.
Okay.
So that part worked because the interest convergence was ongoing. Does that mean that in New York restaurants, when did you last see a black waiter? in a good New York restaurant.
I don't go back. I can't afford good New York restaurants, so I don't know.
I don't get there very often, but you see very few black
Okay. What are these silent covenants that in a sense, thwarts social progress in a large sense, or racial social progress in the specific sense?
I think it is this unspoken, unacknowledged, maybe unrecognized, that two things. The first one is that I said with regard to interest convergence, that's the only time major progress is made. And then something that my friend Lonnie Guinier up at Harvard calls interest divergence. That is when white groups are at loggerheads with one another. Their compromise often takes the form of taking away black rights. That's the framers, right? Some were for slavery, insisted on slavery. Others were opposed to it, and they compromised by a series of agreements, provisions in the Constitution that guaranteed protection of property and slaves.
Sure.
That's the Emancipation Proclamation. You know, it sounds great, everything good, but when you looked at it carefully, it did a lot for the country in terms of discombobulating the Southern workforce, which were the slaves, keeping England and France from coming in on the side of the Confederacy, because the anti-slavery people in those countries would see that didn't happen. And it enabled the enlistment of 200,000 or more former black slaves into the Union forces, who became cannon fodder for the most part, weren't wanted, but helped win the war. Now, what did the blacks get out of that? You got this Emancipation Proclamation, which, when you read it carefully, freed not one person. Right. You see. So that was another. And the Hayes tilde. You know, you can go right down. Affirmative action. Affirmative action is not something the civil rights people thought up. It's something that after King was killed, after the riots started, whites who hadn't done much of anything since Brown decided, oh, we better do something. So government and institutions of higher learning and corporations, we brought in some folks, you know. And for a while, that would seem good. But then the reaction again, why are those black people getting those jobs? I want those jobs. I want those positions. And you started having the lawsuits, and slowly but surely, any use of race, the only use of racial classifications you had left were in these affirmative action programs. And whites could challenge them and have the court look with the same scrutiny that they once looked at segregated policies. And so in the two cases before the Supreme Court now, and of schools' kind of voluntary desegregation plans, that is not court ordered, right, have very little chance of success because they at some point use race in the assignment process. Okay. So that it's kind of turned the whole thing around. So the one thing that started off as interest convergence slowly turned over to interest divergence, and you had that pattern again. We could spend the rest of the morning on we'll do it
when we're finished in Offset. We certainly will. In Faces at the Bottom of the Well, I guess it's the third of a series of books that really are very different. I mean, you wouldn't expect it from a law professor, where you use allegorical stories and mythical characters to highlight, and legal analysis and rigorous analytical thinking to demonstrate the realities of the black experience, and it's been called critical race theory. How did you come to this paradigm of writing with your fictional civil rights leader, Geneva Crenshaw?
It's a good story. I guess I always wanted to be a writer, but I had no models as writers when I was growing up. But I had models as lawyers and a judge, and they were very encouraging. And I didn't envision that cold water flat thing being very good. So I went to law school, and then became a civil rights lawyer. And then finally, because of this affirmative action thing, got to start teaching. I had no job offers a year before King was killed. a half dozen job offers the year after. I'm the same guy, but that's
the environment
that's
right.
how it worked. And I'd been writing since law school, but the Harvard Law School has a law review. The first issue each year has a review of the Supreme Court, but at the beginning of it, there's a foreword that they usually ask some of the great legal scholars in the field to write. It may be about the cases, it may be about some other area. And in, I guess, 1985, they asked me to do it. And I said, boy, sinner, don't let this harvest pass. I wanted to write about race, but to write about it in the strictly legal stuff with thousands of footnotes, and it was just going to be boring. And the editors said, if you did one of those kind of things, it would be mediocre, but it wouldn't matter. But if you're going to write this fiction, we really have to work. And they helped me, and we worked very hard. And that was the beginning, because it was 4 stories. First time ever, and probably the last time ever, that the Harvard Law Review foreword would be basically 4 allegorical stories. And then a publisher saw it and said, well, why don't you work this into a book? And that's how good old Martin Kessler, late president of Basic Books.
Well, I would recommend, and unfortunately time's running out, I would certainly recommend this book and Space Traders, which was an HBO movie and really a remarkable example of this new critical race theory. Okay, we've got 30 seconds left. What's next for Derrick Bell? Are you writing? I know you're teaching and you love the teaching.
No, and teaching is probably my main contribution to the whole professional area, and teaching at NYU is just a great. I can't believe they pay me too. So that
I understand.
I'm going to probably keep doing that as long as I can. But I also have some other writing projects I would like to do.
Share, briefly?
Well, another writing project dealing maybe with Geneva Crenshaw's daughter that I didn't know that she had.
Ooh.
And who was a very feisty,
contemporary woman.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
We're waiting. Looking forward. So you're coming back when Geneva. What's Geneva's daughter's name?
Genesee.
Genesee. Okay, when Genesee reaches the page, we'll talk.
Very good. I'd be glad to do it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. On a hooded sweatshirt and tries to jog around the wrong block, he's going to be in trouble. Although Tiger Woods is saying, if Oprah, greatly beloved. So what we have here is this sense that these guys are threatening. I can't say, because there have been some incidents in New York, the one with the Jewish guy who was kind of deranged, got killed, they didn't have to do that. But mainly it's in black neighborhoods or black folk who are deemed not in control. And I think that there's a tendency to overreact. If you look, it's easy to tell somebody who's going to get 25 years.
Here we're in a new millennium. Is the story the same, and what is the story?
I think the story is that America views blacks, other than the ones that they deem to have made it, and even they, as threatening. I think threatening is the word. And if you're in a poor neighborhood where the crime rate is high because the unemployment rate is high, that's even more threatening. And even when, if Tiger Woods
protesting the Amadou Diallo shooting. He's Derrick Bell, currently professor of law at New York University. He's the author of 9 books, most recently Silent Covenants and Ethical Ambition, as well as the now standard law school text Race, Racism, and American Law. His legal articles have appeared in the most prestigious law journals, and he has been published or featured in all the major American news media. Welcome, Professor Bell. It's an honor.
Thank you very much, Doug. And Derrick is fine.
Oh, thank you. As I noted in my intro, we first met with your wife, Janet, who was a student of mine at Baruch, when we picked you up at the first precinct after being arrested and protesting the Amadou Diallo shooting.
Right.
We've got the headlines. Cops face justice, facing 25 years. Hello, I'm Doug Musio. This is City Talk. He is one of the most highly respected constitutional law professors in America and one of our most prominent civil rights activists. He was the first African American to be tenured at Harvard Law School, where he resigned to protest the school's failure to appoint women of color. He served as dean of the University of Oregon Law School, where again he resigned when the faculty refused to hire a qualified Asian American woman. I first met him with his wife Janet when we picked him up after him being arrested